to tell anybody is that I don't think it's necessarily out of reach, but it's out of reach if you think it's out of reach. And it's all really perception and where you see yourself being able to be. So if somebody only feels comfortable starting with a single family property or a duplex, you should do that, because you could always grow and you could always expand what you work on. But the worst thing you can do is just not do anything.
Welcome back to What's the Good News, the best insider look into the most influential individuals in the real estate industry as a whole.
I'm your host, Michael Smith, and with me as always is Mr. Dominic Cardarelli. He is one of the best closers I know, and together we have over 20 years of real estate experience. Today on the show, we have Mr. Charles Seaman, who serves as a managing partner of Cash Flow Champs, which is a syndication company in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's responsible for building and maintaining broker relationships and oversees the company's underwriting activities. After negotiating and raising capital for deals, he continues to remain involved. He manages the assets so that they perform in a manner that provides investors with exceptional returns. He has 14 years of prior experience working for a commercial real estate investor in New York City. And during this time, he assisted with acquiring deals, obtaining financing, managing and leasing the properties. He's currently a general partner in 8 multifamily properties totaling 691 units. Charles, what's the good news, buddy?
Well, I'm glad to be here today, guys. Michael and Dom, thanks for having me, and I'm thrilled to be on the show.
Yeah, we're happy
Excellent.
to have you, Charles. I occasionally stop into your weekly underwriting sessions that you do every Saturday at 4 p.m. And dude, the way that you work through spreadsheets, man, I thought I was good at spreadsheets until I saw you just got in there, you know, all the hotkeys, man. You can just tell you're seasoned vet. And those meetings that you host continually provide value to me in terms of just understanding what a lender looks for when they're underwriting, you know, not even like a smaller deal, but like the larger deals that you continue to analyze all of the time, like 250 plus unit buildings. And, you know, that's a hard thing for a lot of investors to swallow, man. Like, you know, getting into a deal of that size and magnitude, it's a lot, but you make it seem just so effortless and easy.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. Admittedly, I'm really not as much of a spreadsheet expert as you may think, but I fathom myself just knowing where to put the right things and put them in the right spots.
Yeah, for sure. And really, I mean, that's kind of what underwriting really comes down to, is just presenting it with kind of that bow that looks good, that, you know, the underwriters are going to take a look at and ultimately push it through to the funding stage, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Man, so obviously you've been doing this for a while, but, you know, I want to kind of just take it back a little bit and kind of understand, you know, how Charles became who Charles is today. Like, how did you get started with your first deal? How did you get into real estate? Kind of walk us through that, man. Like, where did the journey begin for you?
Yeah, totally. So it's interesting because unlike most people, I really didn't set out to say, oh, I want to become a real estate investor. I was fortunate in a way that I kind of stumbled into it, because where it really started was when I was 20 years old, and I wasn't actively seeking a real estate, you know, profession. It was more so that I was young, dumb, and broke, as I like to tell people, and I needed a job, and I wound up working for a gentleman who's very successful at a lot of different things, and I was fortunate to work very closely with him and to learn a lot. And he had different businesses. He had a plumbing company, he had bars and restaurants, he had commercial real estate, and my role there eventually expanded to help him manage all of his different businesses and properties. And because of that, I got to work very closely with him and really just, for lack of a better term, sit under the learning tree. And of the different industries that he was in, you know, I saw, you know, positive aspects in each of them, but it was the commercial real estate side that really attracted me. You know, I think I kind of look at commercial real estate as kind of a game of you and chess. And ironically, because I never played chess, but I like the concept of it. And, you know, that kind of led me to it. So my initial goal when I first started working there was that I would stay 2 to 3 years, and I'd wind up eventually going out and doing my own thing. But sometimes life happens. You know, I started making more money. I started gaining more responsibility. Maybe I thought I was important. And next thing you know, I was there for 14 years. And there were 14 good years, but it wasn't really what I ultimately set out to do. So after about a decade of being there, when I was getting ready to turn 30, I started really just thinking and saying, well, is this what I want to do the rest of my life? And, you know, it wouldn't have been a bad choice. You know, I would have always had a roof over my head. I would have always had a few extra bucks in my pocket. I wouldn't have been rich, wouldn't have been poor, but ultimately it wasn't what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And I said, well, when I first started here, I eventually wanted to go out and do my own thing, and somewhere I lost my path with that. So as I was approaching 30, I figured that to be a good time for some soul searching and saying, you know, maybe it's time to start looking at different things. And you know, the real estate side was always the one that talked to me most, but the commercial real estate side I kind of saw out of reach, because even though I had expertise, I knew I didn't have the financial wherewithal to go out there and buy these deals. And I started dabbling in single family and wholesaling in 2014 and 15. I hired a mentor there. And after a few months, I realized two things. One, I really didn't like it. And two, I really wasn't good at it. So it's not to say that I couldn't have become good at it. I probably could have if I would have put in the time and the effort. But I looked at it and said, you know, I'm doing these big commercial deals at work, and now I'm going out and I'm working on a single family home, which just didn't motivate me. And it's not to knock it. You know I have a lot of friends that do very well in single family, so it's just really preference. And then I took a step back, continued working my job. About a year later, in 2016, I went to a free seminar, and that was the first time I discovered syndication. And I said, you know, this could work. I could use my skills, I could do the deals I want to do, and I could use other people's money. So this could be, you know, a good path forward. So then I started diving into that and learning more about it and just kind of immersing myself. And I said, you know, by mid 2017, I was at a point where I was still working my job full time, but I was, you know, starting to look for deals. And, you know, at that point, I was only putting 10 to 15 hours a week in the syndication space because I was still working anywhere from 60 to 90 hours a week at my full-time job. And it's like, okay, you know, I don't have a lot of time to give it, but I have to make sure that whatever time I have is well spent. And what I knew is that a lot of times when I would get home from work, you know, it was at late hours that I wasn't going to be able to pick the phone up and call people. Most people don't want to hear from me at 11 o'clock at night. So I made it a priority to start taking a few minutes during the day. You know, if it was 5, 10, if I was able to get 30 minutes, great. But most days that didn't happen. Just to go out and schedule some phone calls in advance so I could make sure I got them in the afternoon. And then at nighttime, I would go home and I would underwrite deals, and I would do things that didn't require me speaking to other people because I knew that I get home pretty late. So after about 2 years, I knew I'd made good progress, and I knew I was a lot further along than when I first started in the syndication space, but I also knew that I wasn't anywhere near where I wanted to be. And at the pace I was going, I mean, I said jokingly to myself, it's probably going to take me 10 years to close a deal. So that didn't excite me. So I decided to mix things up a bit, and I said, well, let's leave my job of 14 years, relocate from the only city I've ever lived in, which was New York, and totally turn things upside down and try something new. So I moved to Charlotte because that's, you know, one of the areas that our team had focused on, and we still focus on. And I said, let me just put myself right in the center of it. You know, how do you get to know the market better than by living and working in it every single day? And I said, let's just, you know, give it the old college try and go full time with it. So it may not have been the best plan initially. I probably didn't think it through as well as I should have. But it motivated me. It motivates you to start going out there and figuring out how you can get things done and how you can be productive. And it also gave me a lot more time to put into the syndication business. So that way it enabled me to grow it faster.
So just to confirm, I guess there's a difference between, you know, your first deal per se and transactionally, and then your actual first purchase of an asset. So let's talk just more about purchasing the asset. Was your first asset like a single family house, or was your first asset actually a syndication?
Syndication. So I never actually closed anything in the single family space. There was a couple that I pursued, but then by the point that I, you know, had anything with potential, I kind of lost interest in it. and syndication was the first one that I actually closed. So on the ownership side, so it was a 92 unit multifamily property in the Atlanta market. And ironically, we got in on the contract just a few days after I moved out to Charlotte. So,
Wow.
Wow.
That's pretty crazy. Because a lot of people's initial trajectory is like, hey, and really it just has probably more to do with their, financial ability when they first start, right? So it's very odd that you just jumped right into syndication, because everybody else I know, they always just start small, they're like, hey, and then that's kind of how they grow into the syndication.
I would actually make a counter argument on that.
Okay.
So I'm not going to say that I had the financial wherewithal to go out there and do that deal myself, because I certainly didn't. But I had the mindset that I could attract people that did. And thankfully that worked out. There were certainly points of doubt when we had the deal on the contract and we're thinking, boy, we're really going to be able to raise this money. Because there were certainly points where it looked pretty bleak. But then eventually you figure out ways to get over the hurdles and to get across the finish line. So what I would tell anybody is that I don't think it's necessarily out of reach, but it's out of reach if you think it's out of reach. And it's all really perception and where you see yourself being able to be. So if somebody only feels comfortable starting with a single family property or a duplex, you should do that, because you could always grow and you could always expand what you work on. But the worst thing you can do is just not do anything. So take some type of action. And if you feel that you can only do a duplex, that's okay. Start with the duplex. And some people may like that better. I have a lot of friends that have zero desire to ever do multifamily or commercial because they're very happy with single family and smaller multifamily. So it really comes down to preference, I think, and what somebody wants for their life.
Yeah, I think you said a couple things there that are just really important pieces of information. First and foremost was you almost knowing that you were complacent kind of in the situation that you were in New York City. And you kind of just said, hey, the only way that I'm going to really be able to break past kind of this wall that I hit is to just flip everything upside down, get rid of everything that I know and that's comfortable. Right. And that's a lot of problems for a lot of entrepreneurs, is that complacency. They fall into kind of almost the habit, the consistency, and just being comfortable, right? Comfortability as an entrepreneur, that is your worst enemy.
It's the death.
And really being able to you got to live in the feeling of uncomfortability to really get to that next step. So I think that's great that you were able to see that, and at a young age too. I mean, let's be honest, man, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. It's kind of just never really knowing where you're going to end up. But secondarily, it looks like because you had so much experience dealing with that investor in New York City and underwriting deals of large magnitude, that it kind of almost became second nature to you that, hey, what's the difference between underwriting it for this guy or underwriting it for myself? And kind of having that wherewithal where it's like, hey, I might not have the capital necessarily, but I know how to go out and get it. So I love that, man. I absolutely love that, Charles. Your first deal was 92 units. That's like so crazy.
Well, thank you. And what I would say is it does take time to get there. I'd love to say that I had that confidence earlier on, because I didn't. There's a lot of times, even when I was involved, working on single family and wholesaling for a bit, and even before that, where I'd go to real estate meetup events, like a lot of us do. And, I go to all these meetup events in New York. And when I hired the single family mentor, he brought a good point to my attention. He said, why do you go to these meetups? Because I would just go because I'm like, oh, I guess I should. But what are you hoping to achieve out of it? Because, you need to have an objective with everything. And I just went. I never really had an objective. I just said, maybe I'll meet somebody and let's see where it goes. But you need to give yourself a clear goal and give yourself an objective. And one of the things I learned by going to those meetups, a lot of times I felt out of place, because even though I had good experience at my job and I had good knowledge, what I didn't have was deals on my own portfolio. I had somebody else's deals that I was overseeing, but I didn't have any of my own. And, people would come and just in natural conversation and natural, events at the meetups, you speak to them and you exchange ideas. And a lot of times people would tell me, you have such great ideas. I did what you said last month and it worked out good. And one night it kind of clicked and it resonated with me. And I said, why is everybody else taking my ideas and I'm not making any money with them? And I started thinking about it. I said, well, what do they have that I don't? And the only thing I can come up with is that regardless of where they are or what they knew, they had the courage to go out there and take action. And that's what I wasn't doing. I was going to meetups. I was, buying different education courses. I hired a mentor, but I wasn't really putting in the time and the effort. And a large part of that was because I just lacked the belief to say, okay, I can go out there and do this. And maybe it's because like when you're working your job, you think to yourself, well, even though it's not always perfect, at least there's a steady paycheck every week or every 2 weeks, whatever it is. And you get something coming in where it's like, okay, I know what to expect. Whereas, going on your own, it's always a little more of a wild card. And it probably took me 2-3 years before that really set in. I was like, wow, why? And I started just thinking to myself, why can't I do what these guys are doing? Meeting these guys at meetup events that are doing deals, aren't I at least as good as they are? And, I had to start catching myself when you let those self-doubts creep in and you let those negative thoughts creep in. And I had to start reconditioning the way I thought to say, well, you know what? I can do this. If this guy can do it, I should be able to do it. And I had to start just reframing how I thought in my own head, because that's a big part of the game sometimes.
Yeah, it definitely is. When do you think that light bulb aha moment was? Because, limiting beliefs, I think, is your worst enemy as a person, right? You think that you can't do it, and that's kind of what it is. But when do you think for you personally, Charles, you actually had that light bulb go off where it was like, you know what, screw this. I can do it. I can make this happen.
It was probably somewhere around 2016 or 17. I'd been involved going to different real estate meetups for a couple of years by that point. And it was almost around the time that I kind of discovered syndication. And I thought to myself, well, why can't I do this? And like I'm sure many of us, I bought no shortage of education programs through the years. I bought everything from stock trading to eBay to different real estate things. But truthfully, I hadn't acted on it. It wasn't the program's fault. It was my fault. And I hadn't done what I needed to produce the result that I wanted. So then I started thinking about it because I was getting ready to buy a multifamily one. And I said, well, am I really going to do something here? Or am I just going to let them sit in the closet like the other ones I bought and not really produce the result I want? And I said, well, this is the path I want to go down. And I definitely enjoy this side of it more. And then I had to start conditioning myself and say, okay, you know what? I can do this. Because before I went out and I invested, $15,000 or $20,000 in another program, I'm like, okay, let me make sure I'm actually going to use it so it just doesn't collect dust this time.
At some point, you realize like it's not going to do itself. And I think, like Dom said, it's the limiting beliefs that sometimes people are scared to fail too, especially when it comes to money, first of all, but then also, going to all those events. It's like, hey, when you go there next time, you don't want to be the person saying, hey, I fucked up,
Right.
So within your social circle, you also have some type of fear, I guess, that some people look at you differently. But I'm glad that you did it. And then, I encourage everybody to do the same thing. I mean, education is definitely something that it's only worth it if you take massive action.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
You have to follow up on it. Don't do no good sitting in the closet.
So just in case people are not aware of what syndication is, it involves, general partners and limited partners raising capital, essentially pooling capital together to purchase an asset. So can you talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges of not only raising the capital, but, finding the asset and then, purchasing the asset and then bringing it, where the value add is once you stabilize it?
Absolutely. So very similar to single family. It's no different in multifamily that it's going to take a process to find deals. You're going to go through a lot of frogs before you get the prince, for lack of a better term. So you have to go through a lot of duds and a lot of ones that don't make sense to find one that does. And I think oftentimes it really just comes down to consistency. And that's, I always say what we do in this space, there's no rocket science involved. There's no brain surgery. It's just consistency. And it's very much a long game. So I tell people, if you're looking to make money, big money in the next few months, syndication is probably not the right approach for you. Now, I mean, some people might. I don't know really too many that have. But if you're okay with it being a long game, and that's the game you're looking to play, then I think syndication could probably have more potential than most other strategies. So it just depends on what somebody wants out of it and how soon they want it. Now, the challenges with finding deals, so I think similar to single family, it's just numbers. It's repetition. It's going through enough, speaking to people regularly. So in general, there's really two types of deals I would tell you on the multifamily side. You have deals that are less than 50 units and deals that are more than 50 units. The ones that are less than 50 units, I would tell you, while you could find them from brokers and you could find them from wholesalers, in most cases, you're probably better off just going direct to seller. And it could be a direct mail campaign. It could be a Facebook ad campaign. It could be any way that's going to put you in touch with sellers. And if I was focusing on those deals, I probably wouldn't put as much time and effort into, broker relationships and things like that, because it's not really as critical. When you start crossing that 50 unit threshold, give or take, that's when most of these deals become almost exclusively about broker relationships. And could you win a 200 unit deal by going direct to seller? You could. So let me be clear for anybody out here. If you wanted to take that approach, you could do it. Is it the easiest path? Probably not. You're probably going to have to look at a lot more deals than you would otherwise. And the reason why is a lot of people use the brokers as gatekeepers. So oftentimes you're not really getting directly to sellers in those larger properties. And, so having broker relationships is key. So another thing I did when I moved down here, so one of the roles that I play on my team is I'm in charge of the acquisitions. And I knew that I'd be able to make a better impression by meeting brokers in person on a regular basis. And it's an old-fashioned approach, but I say it works very well. A lot of schmoozing. You take them out for drinks, you take them out for lunch. You get together and you bond. And most times when I get together with the ones that I have good relationships with, we don't really talk about business too much. But ultimately what happens is just by hanging out and having drinks or having lunch, they may think of a deal they have and say, oh, have you seen this one yet? And then I'll say, no, I haven't seen that. Why don't you send it over to me? Most of the deals that I have done have been worked out over lunch meetings. So the one difference I would say between like larger multifamily versus single family and smaller multifamily is that the smaller deals are more transaction based, in the sense that you're looking at, individual deals, and you may wind up doing some deals with the same seller or the same broker or the same wholesaler, but it's probably not as much repeat business. Whereas on the larger stuff, it's all repeat business. So like the first deal I did probably took me 150 to 200 deals to look at before I got that one. And ironically, I didn't even find it. It was one of our partners that found it. But with the deals that we do now I'm probably 30 to 40 deals, because for two reasons. One, I have better relationships, and two, I have a better track record. So as you have those things, you see more opportunities open up to you that you wouldn't have had before. And that's one of the benefits with larger deals, is by having those relationships and getting people to know who you are and what you do, it increases the speed at which you're able to get better deals going forward.
Yeah. Real estate's a relationship business. Let's call it what it is. Some of the best deals that me and Mike have come across have been through referrals. I mean, me and Mike know this guy, right? This guy out of New York. Okay. And this guy, he continues to perplex me. He will buy a deal from me and Mike. Okay. He'll rehab it. He'll invest a bunch of money into it. And then about 9 months later, almost like clockwork, and he'll be like, hey guys, I don't know what happened, but I want to sell this property. And after he spent like 20 to 30 grand rehabbing it, he'll sell it back to us for less than what he bought it for originally. It blows my mind. And I think that it's just a passion project for him. He just does it because he wants to feel like he's a part of the real estate industry. And he'll do this maybe a couple times a year. And it's like, this guy continues to just give us money. It's the weirdest thing ever, but he feels good about it. So we continue to spend the time with him. It's so funny, Charles. It's so funny.
That's a great relationship. You need 10 more of those.
Yeah, right. Yeah, literally, you can run a whole business off of 10 of those guys.
Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of talk about, so with syndication, it continues to just intrigue me and blow my mind. And, I wanted you to speak just upon the different tranches of income that you can earn off of syndication, because it's not just off of getting the deal, right? There's a couple different ways that you can monetize that transaction. So I wanted you to kind of speak a little bit about, hey, it's not just getting this thing under contract and closing on it. I want you to speak kind of about the different ways that, you and your company are able to make money on these things.
Sure. So there's really 3 or 4 different ways that you're primarily going to make money. So the first one is an acquisition fee. So the acquisition fee is paid when the deal closes and when the capital raise is complete. Sometimes those things happen at the same time. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you could close and still be raising. But once both those things are complete, you get paid the acquisition fee. And depending on the size of the deal, it could be anywhere from 1% to 5% of the purchase price. So what you'll usually see is that money winds up getting split amongst the GP team. Second way is you get an asset management fee. So the asset management fee is an ongoing fee. Most times it's typically 1% to 2% of the effective gross income that the property brings in. And that's paid, it can be either monthly or quarterly a lot of times. The third way is that you could also get cash flow from the property if the property has enough cash flow to do so. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And the fourth way, and really I guess fourth and fifth, you get a disposition fee on the back end when you sell the property, or a refinance fee if you refinance. Most times that's 1% of the sale price or the refinance amount. And you could also participate in the profit upon sale, or potentially any proceeds from the refinance. So of those ways, the most lucrative ones are going to be the acquisition fee, and then on the backside, the asset management fee is more really about covering costs that you have for the GP team than it will be a profit center. So it's going to be paying for the tax return for the GP entity. It's going to be paying for travel costs for team members to go to and from the property. It may pay for an investor portal if you use one of those to house all the investors for the deal. So basically, that won't really be a profit center, but it offsets costs. So that's really the purpose of that. And in recent years, a lot of deals haven't been fat enough where there's enough cash flow for the syndicator to really make a ton. But as market conditions change, maybe we'll start seeing that shift a bit, and maybe that becomes more lucrative. But the acquisition fee and the backside are really your two big money makers as a syndicator.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, Cash Flow Champs, right? That's your current company that you have right now. How did that come about? How did you start that? And how long after you had closed that 92 unit deal did that just come to fruition?
Sure. So I was working with 2 partners from shortly after I first started in syndication up until about May of 2022. And we had a good run, but we just determined that we had different visions for where the company was heading. So we decided to part ways then. And at that point, I was thinking to myself, well, what do I do next? Do I just kind of be a lone wolf, and do I go find groups to work with? Maybe I go out and find deals and bring them to groups and have them close them. And part of me thought about that, but I said, being a control freak, I didn't really like that idea because it left too many variables out of my control that could go wrong. So then I thought, well, let's go find a new team. And I didn't necessarily want to rush into a partnership because I wanted to make sure we got the right team and the right players there, so that way it's a good fit. But two of the guys that are part of Cash Flow Champs, Ryan and Prashant, I'd worked with them in different capacities on deals, and while we weren't formally partnered, we were partnered on certain deals on a deal-by-deal basis. And one thing I could see pretty quickly was that both of them had really good work ethics. And to me, that's always important because I always work like an animal. I always say, I'm not necessarily expecting everybody to do that, but I like when I see that. It's a good thing. So, the 2 of them I knew had good work ethics just from working with them on different deals. And I said, that's good. I think they can keep up with me. And, for Ryan, he's the most detailed person I've ever met. So I figured he was really good for the items that you have to go in the weeds for, and he could figure out operational things. And Prashant was stronger on the capital raise and the investor relations side. So I said, that's kind of a good starting point. And then from that point, it just morphed. And we actually have a bigger team than most people do. We have 6 partners, which is definitely a big syndication group. But we all do different things. And, for me, I oversee the acquisitions and the asset management. And eventually, I think we'll probably get somebody to handle the asset management. For the time being, I do that. Ryan does operations. We have 2 partners, Paul and Prashant, that do investor relations. And the reason we brought in two people there is that we felt that was the item we're going to have to bulk up on the most. And we said, well, let's see if we can do it faster by bringing in an extra partner. And even if we give a little more of the pie away, it gives us a lot more productivity so we can bulk up that base faster. And then the last two guys, Brian and Christian, we brought in for marketing, branding, and social media, because initially the thought was, we're going to need this on an ongoing basis. And for me, I'm 38. The rest of my partners are 49 and 50. And I said, let's be truthful. None of us are overly adept with social media, and none of us want to be. But it's something that we need to be doing, and we need to be putting out content regularly. We need to be doing things that are attracting people just to make sure we have constant leads coming in. So we brought them in because they help us with that, and they oversee that, and they basically man all of our social media accounts and do all the promotional work. So it's been great. And it's just finding people that are the right fit, that have the same goals and similar mindsets to where you are, and then figuring out how do you structure it so everybody benefits.
In terms of the raising of the capital, I mean, is there a minimum threshold by which a property makes sense or not? I mean, you could syndicate money for anything, right? But there's fees involved, right? There's fees involved with the legal. There's fees in filing with SEC. I mean, what is the minimum threshold you think somebody should be targeting for a syndication?
My general rule of thumb is a $2 million purchase price. If it's less than that, I would tell you you're probably wasting money syndicating. Now, if it's the only path you have to go, then listen, by all means do it. But if I was looking at a smaller deal, I'd probably work on finding one or two partners that have some money and just do more of a JV type setup rather than a syndication.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, in terms of analyzing deals, Charles, right, you're in charge of the acquisitions for Cash Flow Champs right now. So when you're going through your underwriting process, because you have a crap ton of experience doing that, what are some of the things that you look for in terms of returns, value add, ability to increase, just returns on that? What do you look for ideally? And what's kind of your minimum thresholds that you need in order for a deal to make sense for you guys to consider looking at it?
Good question. So the major ones in terms of the return metrics are usually 15% average annual return, 14% IRR, 7% cash on cash return over the life of the deal. So those are really the three main ones we focus on. And generally, if we find something that meets that, we'll usually explore it further and see if we can seriously pursue it. Right before this interview, I was actually on with two of my partners, and we were looking at a deal in the Virginia market that we've actually been looking at for about 9 months. And it started as one that was off market and distressed, and then they did a full marketing, and I said, how distressed could it really be, if there's time to do a full marketing? And lo and behold, each time we saw it, the price dropped. It started somewhere in the $7.5 million range last May. And just last week, the seller gave the keys back to the bank, and he got foreclosed on. So now we're trying to look at it as a short sale. And just like you guys know from what you do, sometimes there's persistence that pays off, right? You may not get it the first time. We didn't get it in May. We didn't get it in July. We didn't get it in October. But maybe we'll get it now that it's back with the lender. And it's just figuring out what it takes to happen. So in a deal like that, we would look at a deal like that as having more risk, because in addition to just the foreclosure, the reason it was foreclosed is because the prior owner was out of country, and he was really managing the property very haphazardly. So there's a lot of unsavory tenants there. There's also, 12 units out of 92 that are damaged due to fire that were never repaired. So it's not a clean property. It's going to be a messy one if we wind up getting it. So in a case like that, you'd want higher returns because you want to justify that extra risk. So like in that case, I said if it has less than the 20% IRR and average annual return, I have no interest in it, because, why would I do that for 15%? We can go out and buy a cleaner property for 15%. Yeah. We want to get a little extra bang for our bucks. So always keep that in mind with anybody listening. With any investing, if you're going to take higher risk, make sure that the reward actually justifies the risk.
Makes sense. And for you guys with your company, right? So you said that your minimum threshold is at least $2 million on a purchase price. So for someone that's looking to park their money into a syndication fund like yours, what's the minimum amount that you look for from each investor that's parking their capital there?
Yes, let me get a little clarity to that. So the $2 million amount is what I would recommend kind of as a general rule of thumb for people looking to syndicate that I probably wouldn't do less than that. But we're really looking for deals that are $10 million and up at this point. So in
Got it.
most cases, if it's on the smaller side of that range, like 10 or 15 million, we'll probably do $50,000 minimum investments. And then if they're larger deals, we'll probably do 100,000s with the idea that, eventually, as you start looking at bigger deals, if you keep the minimum too low, you wind up with too many investors and it becomes more of a burden with paperwork and administrative work than anything else.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about syndication as well is, even if you don't have a plethora of experience in the industry, you're surrounding yourself with guys with this is what they do. Individuals like yourself and your partners where they have the competency, the experience to not only source the deal, to manage the deal, to employ the contractors, to do the value add. And I think that that's really where the value comes in because, as Mike always says, when you're trying to invest in real estate, is it because you generally are passionate about swinging a hammer and doing real estate? Or is it because you want the return on your money, right? And most of the time, it's people are just looking for a return on their money.
Right. I agree with you on that.
So, it's funny to look at that. So, after you had did that 92 unit acquisition, right? You have 691 units now, man. That is crazy, Charles. It's a lot of units.
Thank you.
How do you guys manage that? Like that is a lot on your plate. What would you say like the most difficult part of dealing with a portfolio of that size is?
So I think it's a few things. In any business, I think your greatest challenge, but also your greatest asset is the people around you. And it's getting the right people around you. So, for us right now, we're using third-party property management. So we don't necessarily do that in-house. But it's selecting good companies that have people that are motivated to go out there and do what you need them to. And sometimes that's easier said than done because I probably fired more property management companies than I'd like to. But you also have to be fast to pull the trigger and realize when something's not working and say, look, we need to make a change because it's not the right fit. So for our team, we're more in an asset management role. So what that means is we're not in charge of day-to-day operations. We're not going to go lease units and collect rent. Now, if we need to do that, we will get involved, but we don't generally do that. It's not how we operate. But we really steer the ship. So we give direction to the property management company. At the very least, we meet with them every week. And if it's a property that has issues, we're probably going to be speaking with them even more frequently because we always want to make sure that the issues are getting resolved in real time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So getting the right people around you, having good operational procedures in place. I think it's kind of a balance of people and procedures. But to me, I personally manage people a lot better. So I would say that's probably the biggest challenge, but also the biggest asset you have.
Would you say that it's been easier for you to find these larger deals that make sense and kind of a market that's not as, I guess, saturated and mature? Or, what would you say are the biggest differences that you see between those?
Scale, simply scale. I don't know that it's necessarily easier or harder to find them. Now, granted, in New York, part of the reason that it wasn't, super difficult was just because I was already working with somebody that was established. So, once you get to a certain point, like at the beginning, you are calling people looking for deals. But eventually, when you hit a certain point, the pendulum shifts a bit, and all of a sudden, deals come looking for you. So, the gentleman that I worked for was already at that point when I started working with him. So, he was already a real buyer and people knew that. So because of it, at that point, people are calling you left and right. And we're actually spending more time telling them, no, we're not interested. We don't want to do this than, actively searching because people are just bringing you stuff left and right. So I think it's just scale. I think that's the big thing. So New York obviously has a tremendous amount of international presence. The reality is the investment scene up there is incredibly competitive. And one of the reasons it's very, very competitive is because you have a ton of international money. When you see a lot of Asian money, you see it go into New York, you see it go to San Francisco. There's a handful of cities in the US that you see big chunks of international money go to. And while you do have some of that in the Southeast, you don't have an abundance of it. You have a lot in Miami, You have some maybe in Charlotte and Atlanta, but you don't have as much. So in that regard, it does make it a little bit easier to find deals because you're not competing against, groups that are willing to take 0% returns.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where would you say the bulk of your deals are in your portfolio today? Where are you guys picking up most of your apartment complexes?
So we look in 6 states. We look in the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and Virginia. But the Carolinas, for me personally, where the bulk of mine is at this point, they have 3 in North Carolina and 3 in South Carolina. But we're always looking, and those are kind of our target markets.
How did you guys end up deciding that that was where you were going to be? What about those markets really just sticks out to you guys?
So I think it's really the migration patterns of seeing people are leaving the Northeast, they're leaving other areas in the country, and they're coming here. They're coming here because of job growth. They're coming here because of favorable tax laws. They're coming here because of favorable climates. So the area that I live in Charlotte is very much a transient area. I joke around and say, probably 7 out of 8 people are from like New York, Chicago, or Boston in the area that I live in. So you don't really have too many native charlatans, and that's probably like an extreme example. But there's a lot of other areas now that you've seen a lot of people from different parts of the country come into simply because they wanted to get out of the areas they were in and go and have a change. So following those patterns, the general rule of thumb with real estate is always follow the jobs, right? Because if you follow the jobs, people are going to need housing. Now, maybe that'll change as more and more people start working from home. So I guess we'll have to keep an eye on that. But at least historically, I think where jobs go, people go because they need housing.
Yeah, so I just want to shift gears a little bit. I mean, if you didn't do real estate, because I know that's what we all do, but if you didn't do it, what are some of the things you would be doing? What other things are you passionate about that you like to spend time on?
It's a good question. I always say one of these days I should have a work-life balance. I don't know that I've done a very good job of creating that just yet. But the things that I'd probably be more passionate about, I've always been a big pro wrestling fan, so that's my big hobby. Way back when I was a teenager, I aspired to be pro wrestler, but I realized I didn't have the discipline to go to the gym each day. So that one died pretty quick. But then, aside from that, probably giving back in different ways. I like, I'd probably find some way to get involved with either an animal nonprofit in some way. I've always been a big animal person. And, maybe eventually I think some type of philanthropy with giving back by spreading financial education to underprivileged youth.
Yeah, and you said you had a mentor previously. I mean, would you say that your mentor was probably one of the most influential people to you, or would you say there's another person that sticks out, whether it's personally or professionally?
So the single biggest one, without question, would be the gentleman that I wound up working for 14 years. There's no question that I wouldn't be where I am today without him. He probably beat a toughness into me that I didn't have when I started there, but that I needed. And I also learned a lot. The reality is, he used to joke around at one point when I was earlier on there and said, you couldn't get this education at any MBA program in the country. And the truth is he's right. Even though I was good academically, I never enjoyed school. And I knew from an early age that, or at least from a high school age that I wasn't going to college because I just didn't like it. And it was just going out there and kind of carving my path. And I've always been a big believer in the school of hard knocks, and thankfully it's served me well. So so the gentleman I worked with is definitely number one. But the mentor I hired for single family and wholesaling definitely did teach me some good things. And even though I didn't ultimately pursue that path, there's still a lot of good habits that he drilled into me that I still use. And probably one of the big things is just, getting used to working on appointments, because a lot of times I would take things as they came in before that. But as you start setting appointments and you start respecting your time, it teaches other people to do the same thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I also almost look at like a college degree as a depreciating asset nowadays. Every year there's more and more and more of them. And the hardest lessons that I've learned in life have been my failures, right? And that's where you learn the most, right? You learn the most through you just falling on your ass. And as an entrepreneur, man, you have to force yourself to get up and you don't quit. You just kind of take what you learned and you repurpose it and hopefully you don't make those same mistakes. I think what you do every weekend now on Saturday, 4 p.m., right? You do your underwriting class where you let anybody come in for free and they can bring a deal that they found and you will underwrite it right there in front of them and show everyone exactly what it is that you look for and that any underwriter will look for. I think when you talk about philanthropy, I think you're kind of already doing that,
Well,
Charles,
thank
where
you.
you're giving that back because let me tell you something, man, that's something that you can't really learn anywhere. Like no one is going to sit there and tell you what underwriters look for. They're just not going to do that. That's just something that you have to learn through doing deals yourself. So how did that idea come about? When did you start doing that? And like, what was the mission behind doing that? Cause I think it's a great thing that you're doing.
It's interesting because for better or worse, it's kind of become what I'm famous for. So I've embraced it. So I started doing them in March 2020. And it wasn't really intended to become what it is now, but it's morphed into a life of its own. So around late 2019, my former partner made a suggestion and said, maybe we should bring on some unpaid interns to increase deal flow. So I said, yeah, that's a good idea. So I connected with people, most of which were ones that I met at local meetup events. I said, look, why don't we teach you the acquisitions and the underwriting sides of the businesses, and in exchange for it, the only thing we would say is you look in different areas than we're looking in. So that way we're not directly competing. And eventually, if you want to go do your own deals, then you already have those connections and you go out and you do them. So, we recruited about 4 or 5 people that we brought in that capacity. And most of them were local, being I'd met them at meetups. So what we would do is every Saturday, we would just get together in person for about a month or two. And we would kind of do what we do on the underwriting sessions. But then the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, we couldn't get together in person anymore. So I said, well, why don't we just shift it over and we'll start using Zoom? And, I thought about it and said, what's the difference if we have 4 people or 40 people? I mean, we may as well just open up to other people. And if anybody wants to come, great. And if not, then, no harm, no foul. So, I started doing it in late March 2020 on Zoom each week. And the first couple of months, there really wasn't strong attendance. I mean, for the first maybe 7, 8 months, I probably had anywhere between 5 and 10 people. So there really weren't a lot of people outside of the team members that were coming anyway. And somewhere around there, it kind of kicked up in attendance. And all of a sudden, it started going from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20. And, almost 3 years later, I probably have, as of like 4 or 5 months ago, maybe 850 people on the mailing list for it, all of which were organic, because other than promoting it as a call to action on a couple of podcast appearances, I never really did any formal marketing. And truthfully, you'd be hard pressed to know I was doing them unless somebody had told you. So those were all people that heard about it from somebody else, or maybe they heard me on a podcast and they said, let's come. So now we actually have a little bit of marketing behind it, but that's still fairly new with it. So, there's probably 40 or 60 attendees any week, and it's just kind of become what I'm known for. So I said, let me keep going with it. And one, I enjoy it. 2, I look at it as probably the largest way that I'm giving back in the immediate sense. And 3, it's good for the branding also. So it's a plus on all fronts, I think.
Yeah, I agree, man. It's, you put out into the open, hey, I'm underwriting how to look at a 250 unit apartment complex for syndication. That's going to get some interest from a lot of people, right? I mean, that's something that everyone that wants to get into real estate, yeah, sure, I'd love to own a 200 unit apartment complex. Well, Charles is telling me how I can do that, right? So, I could see how it grew. So, from an underwriting perspective, for people that are trying to get into deals, people that are, a little bit newer to the industry, what do you think are the most important things that an underwriter is going to look for in a deal that needs to make sense for it to get through to funding?
Well, I think the big things are all the risks. So the single biggest mistake that I see people make is probably on real estate taxes. And I think a lot of people, for lack of a better term, they don't want to do the work that's required. So a lot of the approaches I take are probably more old-fashioned, because I'm going to tell people to pick a phone up or to actually reach out to a person. In today's society, that doesn't seem to be as popular. But sometimes you need to do that. And with taxes, to me, it's too big of a number not to in most cases, because for these deals, they're usually 6-figure numbers. And there's many times I've seen taxes double and triple, and in rare cases even quadruple. So on a six-figure number, that's huge. So if somebody doesn't do their homework and they don't confirm with the assessor kind of what their process looks like in that county, and it really varies so much from county to county that, I wouldn't recommend giving anybody a rule of thumb, because, the rule of thumb in one county could be very different than the rule of thumb in another county. So you need to take that extra step and confirm. So that's probably the biggest thing I would say. And then the second thing I would say is just make sure that your income and expense projections as a whole are in line with other properties in the area. If they are, then you're probably okay. But if you're projecting some type of rent growth that there's really nothing to compare it to, and you have expenses that are super low, there's a good chance that you may be too aggressive, and maybe you need to rein that in a bit so you can figure out where it should really be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for you guys personally at Cash Flow Champs, where would you say your sweet spot is in terms of the real estate market? Are you looking at like C grade, B grade, A grade neighborhoods? Where are you guys finding a lot of your success?
So for me personally, all of my prior deals are in the C space. One of my partners has some B stuff in there as well from his prior experience. Immediately, it'll probably be in the C stuff simply because that's where we're most competitive. And now that market conditions are changing and cap rates are decompressing, it'll actually make sense to buy C, because you can buy it at a price where you can make money with, versus 2 years ago, buying it at the same cap rate you buy an A property for. That being said, we do eventually want to shift the focus to higher grade assets and higher grade areas. I don't think that's going to happen overnight, but it'll be a gradual change. So I don't think we want to be exclusively in the C space, but I think it's something we realize we're very competitive on. And, we don't want to obviously make an about face change that's going to cause us to be a lot less competitive. But gradually we want to start mixing some better class assets, because it'll give you some more diversity in the portfolio.
Yeah, for sure. I think diversifying is very important. How do you guys see you blending kind of your portfolio? Like, what do you think the ultimate end all be all is for Cash Flow Champs, right? How do you see yourself structuring your portfolio, and why do you think it's going to be structured that way?
Sure. So the structure we probably haven't thought as much about is more as the scale. The goal that we have internally as a company this year is that we want to be doing $500 million of acquisition volume this year. Now for everybody listening, that's not $500 million in my pocket. It's not $500 million on our balance sheet, as great as that sounds. It's just $500 million in acquisitions. As syndicators, you do get to keep a small portion of that. We're not keeping $500 million.
Just out of curiosity, Charles, how many units or apartment complexes do you guys plan on spreading that across?
So it's a good question. The ideal scenario would be 10 to 15 if we can get 30, 40, 50, $60 million deals consistently. But being that we're still open to 10 and 15 and $20 million deals, it could be as many as 25 potentially. So we plan to be very active this year and to have a lot on there. And the 5-year goal is to be doing $1 billion of acquisitions every year consistently. So that would be the goal that we would have company wide. In terms of the structure, I don't think we've thought as much in that. But for me personally, I'd like to see more A and B assets than C's going forward. But initially, it'll probably be heavier weight on the C, because that's where we're most competitive still.
Yeah. Why do you guys want to kind of shift from what you're doing now that's already shown to be successful and kind of make that transition into more A and B class assets?
I've heard a lot of operators and groups say this, and I think there's some truth to it. So in the C properties, you'll almost definitely get better returns, but you'll get more grief. So I'd like to see a little less grief. I don't mind some, but maybe a little less.
Just out of curiosity, do you see a difference in the amount of turnover or maintenance in between the A and the C class?
Turnover, so not necessarily in like the amount of people that leave, but in the quality, yes. So usually when you're dealing with a higher class asset, most times they'll leave the units in better condition. When you're dealing with a lower grade asset, oftentimes people are going to beat the units up quite a bit and not think twice about it. So because of that, while you'll have a similar amount of vacancy and a similar number of turns, the cost of the turn in the C assets will usually be higher.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense, actually. So Charles, if you won the lottery, right? Let's say that you won the lottery for, let's call it $100 million, right? And you could not invest a dime of that into any of your syndication deals, right? couldn't spend a dime of it on any of your syndication deals, can't buy any real estate with it. What's Charles going out and buying with that money? What are you doing with it?
Well, if we're getting a nice chunk, like a good 500 million bucks, I think without real estate, I'd probably say I've always been big on stocks. So I'd probably throw some money in there for sure. Admittedly, even though I hate technology, I think technology is probably the most lucrative thing on the face of the earth. So I'd probably find some good tech startups to invest in. And I'd probably find a wide number of them. I don't know that I'd put a large amount in any one, because I would have the expectation that most of them are going to fail. But my thought would be by investing in enough of them that maybe I'd find one that actually becomes wildly successful and do very well with that. So probably a mix of technology startups, stocks, and maybe some philanthropy.
I like that. What are your thoughts on all this this AI stuff, like Chat GPT, all these artificial intelligence, like Mid-Journey with the image generators? Have you messed around with any of those? What are your thoughts on those?
So admittedly, I haven't. I haven't really used as much tech. Some of my teammates have. Even though I'm younger than some of the other guys, I've probably been more resistant to technology. So my thought is, I think in a business sense, I think it could potentially be incredible.
Yeah.
It concerns me on a societal sense. And I kind of question and say, well, eventually, if AI becomes sophisticated enough, what do you really need people for anymore? And that does concern me a bit, because from a profitability standpoint, I can see it being very effective. From a societal standpoint, it has me concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap up here, and other than your syndication shows that you have every weekly, are there any other books or resources, podcasts that have influenced you or you would recommend for other people trying to get into syndication?
Yeah, so I'll go through a few of them. So books, I really haven't read any about syndication, but the one that everybody usually recommends is by Joe Fairless, and that's the best ever syndication book, I believe it's called. So that's a pretty popular one. I know a lot of people speak very highly of it. Probably the podcast that I listen to most frequently on the syndication side is the Real Estate Syndication Show with Whitney Sewell. And he does 7 episodes a week, so there's a lot of content. Most of the episodes are shorter, 20, 25 minutes, but you'll get some good perspectives there and a lot of insight. And then other than that, I think it's just connecting. There's a lot of groups out there that have free resources. So in addition to the underwriting sessions, we actually have our own podcast now. We also have, webinars. So my partners, Paul and Prashant, usually change off in hosting those. But I would tell anybody out there, just explore information you can. And some people resonate better with one host than another. So find somebody whose style you like and whose content you like, and then just learn as much as you can and get exposure to different people.
Yeah, that's great. And if people want to find you, Charles, they want to get in touch, they want to join the weekly underwriting sessions on Saturday, they want to invest into some of your syndication deals, where can they find you? What's a good email for them to reach out to? Where should they be going? Yeah,
so let me give you the best way. What I'll do is I'll give you my link tree so you can include that in the show notes, and that'll have all my social media and all my contact info. So that'll be the best way for people to find me.
Charles, man, I greatly appreciate your time. I think you are a genius at what you do. I truly appreciate the sessions. I've learned a lot from you specifically. If there's anything I can do to help you, you know where I'm at, brother.
Mike and Dominic, thank you very much. It's been a blast.
You're an absolute beast, Charles. Absolute beast, dude. $1 billion a year, man. I freaking love it, dude. Those numbers are like exceptional, man. And I'm looking forward to seeing the growth.
So am I. It's going to take a challenge to get there, but I like the challenge.
Absolutely, man.
All right, man.